Hello, it is Sunday, June 23rd, 2024, and this is Political Dharma with me, Alan Zundell. Those of you who are regular viewers of this show will notice that I'm not in my usual surroundings. My wife and I actually sold our house in Eugene and have moved into temporary quarters as we continue to look for a new home down in California where our kids and grandkids are. Also, for those of you who have been asking, my hand has pretty much fully recovered, not 100%, but pretty close to it from the surgery I had a few months ago. But today's show is going to be about CNN's exclusion of independent presidential candidate Robert F. Kennedy Jr. from the presidential debates scheduled to be held this coming Thursday, June 27th. Now, last Thursday, the 20th, was the deadline that CNN set for qualifying for the debate, and as is not too surprising, they decided that RFK did not meet their quote-unquote objective criteria. Now, that's even though Kennedy did make some progress in the week preceding that deadline. For example, on Friday, June 14th, just after I had uploaded my video preceding this one, he did get enough signatures to get on the ballot in Washington state. And then on Tuesday, June 18th, the Kennedy campaign also announced that they got on the ballot in Nebraska by gathering enough signatures. Now, they also said on the day before that, on June 17th, that they got on the ballot in Mississippi through the We the People Party, his new political party that he was using to get on the ballot in states where it's easier to get a party on the ballot than it is to get an independent candidate on the ballot. Anyway, the Kennedy campaign said that the We the People Party had gotten on the ballot in Mississippi, but the Secretary of State there said that the party hadn't actually filed all the proper paperwork yet, so they're not actually on the ballot, although I don't think it'll take a lot to get that paperwork in, so that probably could be included sometime soon as they confirm that they actually met all the paperwork requirements. So given that the Kennedy campaign has been in this ballot access process for a while now, this is the NBC News map as of Thursday, June 20th, the deadline for getting in the debate, showing where Kennedy has gotten enough signatures to get on the ballot or been the nominee of a minor political party, which would also be a route to getting him on the ballot in various states. Now, this map isn't entirely accurate. For one thing, it does include Mississippi, which, as I just said, is questionable, and it includes Nevada, which is in a process. The Secretary of State refused their petitions because it didn't have a vice presidential candidate, and then the Kennedy campaign brought a lawsuit against Nevada. I'll be having something more to say about Nevada a little later in the show, but I'm just pointing out that the map shouldn't include Nevada and also Georgia. I don't know why they have Georgia in there, but altogether, with all the states in which I've been able to count that the Kennedy campaign has either been the nominee of a minor political party or gathered plenty of signatures to get on the ballot, he has put 21 states in line to get him on the ballot, which would equal to 298 electoral college votes. The criterion that CNN set, and this is in consultation with both the Trump and Biden campaigns, was that a candidate had to get on the ballot in enough states to get a hypothetical 270 votes in the electoral college. So since Kennedy got enough signatures or got nominations in enough states to get 298, that's 28 more than he would need to get that minimum requirement of 270 electoral college votes. Yet CNN said that they would not include him in the debates. I also want to say about this map that includes some states where he seemed more secure on the ballot. For example, where a minor party is qualified for the ballot and has nominated Kennedy. But even in those states, there's been challenges largely through the Democrats and funded by the Democratic National Committee and Democratic donors to try to get him off the ballot where he's already gathered signatures or prevent him from getting on the ballot where he's gathered signatures. So none of those are secure as of now because there are lawsuits being filed as we talk over the last few weeks and continuing into the future, I'm sure. So anyway, if you count those states, you'd say he's got plenty enough electoral college votes. However, that does not say that he was able to get in the debate. So the Kennedy campaign has been complaining because CNN is allowing Biden and Trump to be in the debate, even though they are not yet the nominees of any political party, because the major parties haven't held their conventions yet, during which the nominees will be chosen. But since both Biden and Trump have enough delegates to get the nomination in their parties, CNN deemed them presumed nominees of the party and therefore qualified to be on the ballot. Now, I don't think this presumed nominee is the real problem here. I think it was obvious that Biden and Trump are going to be nominees of their parties and therefore on the ballot in all 50 states plus the District of Columbia. So therefore, people would expect them to be in a presidential debate. They're going to be on the ballot just about everywhere, if not everywhere. I don't see any problem to them doing that unless somehow something comes up and the Biden or Trump just gets eliminated somehow. I don't mean that in a threatening sense that someone's going to shoot them, but just, maybe Biden withdraws because he's having health problems, or Trump, or who knows what. But as of now, it looks like they're going to be on the ballot, so I don't have any problem with that. The problem is really in how they're treating Kennedy, and there's a long history behind this. Let's take a look at what a Washington Post had to say on the occasion of CNN's exclusion. Now, they note that the campaign spent months gathering signatures, and that those signatures will have to be verified by state election officials before the candidate is certified for the ballot, and that Kennedy also has been nominated by minor political parties, but, and this is a quote from the Washington Post, but many election officials told the Post they won't certify those petitions or greenlight minor party nominees for several weeks, making it impossible for Kennedy to check off the requirement in time for the debate. And down a little bit lower, it also says, CNN has said that because Trump and Biden are their respective parties' presumptive nominees and major party candidates don't have to petition states for ballot access, both satisfy the Electoral College criteria for the debate. All right, so the point I want to make here is that the problem is not that presumptive nominee question, it's that the major parties don't have to petition to get ballot access in the states, but minor party and independent candidates do, and that those states are not even going to, in some states, they're not even going to count the signatures that Kennedy has been turning in because it's not on their schedule yet. And some of the states, I think, haven't even allowed candidates to file signatures yet. It'll be done. Most of these states, the deadlines are in July and August. So we got a long way to go. So the real problem here was that the first debate was scheduled so much earlier than in previous years. June is before the presidential nominations. Every presidential debate before now, those debates were held in the fall after the presidential nominees were chosen by the major parties and any other candidates had a chance just try to make an impact. But not in this case. And I think this was deliberate on part of the Biden campaign because they are the ones who wanted to confer with Trump, bypass the Commission on Presidential Debates, and set the first debate as early as this June, making it impossible for Kennedy to qualify because he wouldn't even be able to get a lot of states to certify his ballot access. So that was the real problem there, that there was a successful attempt by the Biden campaign and collusion with the Trump campaign in order to set an early debate, which was going to exclude Kennedy all along. No matter how many signatures he gathered, he didn't have a chance because those signatures were not going to be certified. This is part of a long history of major parties rigging the presidential debates to try to exclude third-party and independent candidates. So what I want to do now is go into a little bit of history of that in order to make it clear how this came about. So these criteria are not really objective. They've been cooked up by the major parties primarily, and often with the participation of entities that are organizing the campaigns. It wasn't until 1976 that this really became a tradition of having a presidential debate in every presidential election year. You remember the famous Kennedy-Nixon debate in 1960 from your history. I don't remember it. I was like 8 years old at the time. But anyway, there weren't debates in between those until 1976 when it was Jimmy Carter versus Gerald Ford. And the League of Women Voters stepped forward to organize a presidential debate. And then for several subsequent electoral years after that, the League of Women Voters, which is independent of the major parties, was the one who was organizing these debates and setting them late towards the fall, just before the November election, and determining which candidates could be included. And what they tried to do was set not some strict criteria, but have a general sense of whether a candidate should be taken seriously by weighing a lot of different evidence, such as whether they were on the ballot in several states, how they were doing in public opinion polling, and anything else that they thought was relevant to determining if a candidate was important enough to be included in the debates. So this was fine in 1976 with Ford versus Carter, but in 1980 a problem came up, and that problem was named John Anderson. He was a Republican congressperson from Illinois, I think, and he entered the Republican primary and wasn't doing too well, even though he got a fair amount of media attention and public attention as well. He wasn't quite making in the presidential primaries, but they found out that he was polling better with the general public than he was with Republican primary voters. Now, this sounds like a parallel to RFK, right? RFK started out in the Democratic primaries. It looks like he wasn't going to be able to do well because the Biden train was crushing any other potential candidates from getting much of a traction before the primaries happened. Anyway, he started in the Democratic primary and then he decided to become an independent. Now, when John Anderson decided to become an independent, public started taking interest, and eventually the League of Women Voters did determine that he was going to be in the presidential debates. However, you see here a picture from him in that first presidential debate, and you see my background in the back there, so let's fix that. There he is on stage with Ronald Reagan, who was the Republican nominee. And what happened is that even though the League of Women Voters said they took account of a lot of different criteria, including the fact that Anderson had been polling up to about 26%, which is above the 15% that we're familiar with, by the end of the summer, he was down 12%. People had lost interest, and he had made a few missteps. And Jimmy Carter didn't want him in the presidential debates, thinking that he was going to pull centrist voters away from Carter and that it would allow Ronald Reagan to win. So Carter refused to participate in that debate. And in the first presidential debate, there was only John Anderson and Ronald Reagan. Reagan apparently did very well. I don't know if I watched that one. I must have watched that one because I was interested in politics at the time. The second debate that was scheduled was not held. And then finally, Anderson dropped in the polls, and League of Women Voters decided to exclude him from a third debate, and it was only Reagan and Carter. But because of this, now in '84, the next presidential debate, Reagan was the incumbent, and he was quite high in the public opinion polls, and there was no independent candidates challenging them or stepping into the race. But as we approached the 1988 race, things looked different, and the League of Women Voters decided to step out of being the organizers of these because, and you see this article from Wikipedia, and I don't usually rely on Wikipedia too much unless it confirms what my previous knowledge was, and this kind of corresponds with what I knew before. Anyway, the League of Women Voters said in 1987 they were going to withdraw from sponsoring the debates, protesting how the major party candidates are attempting to dictate nearly every aspect of how the debates were conducted. And they issued a press release that said in part, quote, "The demands of the two campaign organizations would perpetrate a fraud on the American voter," and that their, end quote there, and that their, quote, "aim to add debates to their list of campaign trail charades devoid of substance, spontaneity, and answers to tough questions," end quote. As you see in the final paragraph on the screen there, the campaigns had negotiated behind closed doors and presented League of Women Voters with 16 pages of conditions for the debates, not subject to negotiation. So the two major party two major parties decided they were going to behind the scenes dictate the terms of the debate, and this was in part to exclude any potential third party candidates and also to make sure that they weren't asked questions that were too difficult for either of them. So the new sponsors of debates was the Commission on Presidential Debates, which sponsored the debates all the way up to this presidential year when Trump and particularly the Biden campaign decided they were going to bypass the commission. The commission was not an independent entity. They were run by the two major parties, not their candidates, but the major parties. And as you can imagine, they had a lot of negotiations with their own candidates to determine how the debate should be held. But Ross Perot managed to get around this. Now, in 1992, Ross Perot came out of nowhere. He got a lot of public attention. He bought ads on TV, appeared on Larry King, which was a very popular late night television show. And he started going up in the polls. He got up to about, what was it, in a Gallup poll in June. He got, when they asked voters who they're likely to vote for, Ross Perot, where are you, Ross? He got 39% as opposed to George H.W. Bush's 31% and Bill Clinton, who was new on the scene, governor of the state of Arkansas, 25% for Clinton. Anyway, it was 39 Perot, 31 Bush, and 25% Clinton. So Perot was doing very well. He did decide, his campaign started to fall apart and his polls went down, and he withdrew from the race temporarily until he went back. But even though all that happened and his polls were now way down in the 9% range, 9 or 12%, the League of Women Voters decided they're going to include him anyway once he resumed his candidacy, because he had shown, not the League of Women Voters, I'm sorry, because the Commission on Presidential Debates decided they had to include him, number one, because he had gotten so much public attention that they would look it would be very obvious how they were trying to exclude him if they didn't include him. And number two, if I remember right, the Clinton campaign decided that Perot would probably hurt Bush more than Clinton, and Clinton needed that extra edge, so they demanded that Perot be included and tried to make a public issue of it if Bush tried to keep Perot out, making it look like it was only the Republican candidate who was against having an open debate and not the Democrats. But this was a move by the Clinton campaign. Again, I'm basing this on memory. I tried to check it in my research, but wasn't able to find anything specific to that. So anyway, in 92, Ross Perot did get in. Of course, he didn't get any electoral college votes, even though he got about 19% of the popular vote. And they decided they were not going to let that happen again. In 96, Ross Perot ran again for the presidency, this time as the candidate of the Reform Party, which had been created in the wake of his previous campaign, but he was not included in the presidential debates. Now, why was that? Given that with the Reform Party, he was on the ballot in plenty enough states to get that hypothetical 270 votes in the Electoral College. He had gotten 19% in the popular vote in the previous election. He was a well-known public figure, so it would seem like the weight of criteria there would be in favor of including Perot. I think the big difference was now Bill Clinton was the incumbent president, and he had the advantage in that race, running against Republican Bob Dole, so that he did not want to include Perot, and nobody else did either. So the Commission on Presidential Debates did not extend its invitation to Ross Perot. There was a big outcry from the media and from the public over the exclusion of Perot, and how that seemed like it was so inconsistent with the previous presidential election. But so the response of the Presidential Commission was then to make their criteria even clearer, so they said, so that you had to still be constitutionally, you still had to meet the constitutional requirements for being president, which just about every candidate does. Then you had to be on the ballot in enough states to get that majority in the Electoral College, which a lot of different candidates do, including libertarians and Green Party candidates and Ross Perot. But You had to get 15% in so many public opinion polls by select organizations. So it was no longer just a lot of evidence showing that you were a serious candidate or that, they had to take you seriously. It was now specifically you got to get that 15% in the public opinion polls before the debates were supposed to be starting. And Ballotopedia tried to answer the question whether the presidential debates have been rigged. I'll show you their headline here on Ballotopedia. This is an article by Paul Brennan, originally published in 2016 and then updated in 2021, asking, are the presidential debates rigged in favor of the major party candidates? And I'll show you their conclusion here, which is probably not too surprising to you. And that is that the Commission on Presidential Debates was created by the two parties in 1987, and its eligibility criteria for the debates, including a polling threshold that no independent or third-party candidate has met in the 56 years since the first presidential debate. So the charge of rigging by the major parties, they found was correct, and the new criteria that is supposed to be more objective and clear actually would have excluded both John Anderson and Ross Perot if it had been implemented in those particular presidential races. So what we have here is a long history of the major parties and the major party candidates doing what they can to take control of the debate process, to make sure they exclude candidates they don't want, and that they make sure the people questioning them are going to lob them not too difficult questions. They want to have the whole thing staged in such a way that it's favorable to them and nobody else. So that is the history of the presidential debates and the conclusions reached when someone examined it. Now, Kennedy made some hay out of this, even though it was determined by the Biden campaign early on by scheduling this in June that they were going to keep Kennedy out of the debates. Kennedy still showed that he was making progress in getting on the ballot in several states, and he had at least 3 polls that he presented that showed that 15% requirement, which is so difficult to get. He actually got, and he actually presented a 4th poll, which CNN did not approve of. But he made hay out of it by getting media attention by the fact that they decided not to include him. And even though he was advancing and getting, access on a lot of ballots and getting a lot of public attention. So at this point, as some voters are just tuning into the presidential race more seriously, you would see a story about how Robert F. Kennedy Jr., that name rings a bell here to people, is being excluded from the debates, even though he's had all these other things going on in his favor, and they might start asking questions. Well, why not? What is it he's going to say? Wouldn't he, isn't he a good choice? We've been demanding for a choice other than Trump or Biden. Why not Kennedy? Why isn't he there? Why can't I see what he has to say? So probably a lot of people are asking questions. Kennedy was able to get his name in the news, get more people to consider him, even though it would have helped him immensely more if he had gotten on that debate stage, because people would have seen that he's not some crackpot, especially compared to Donald Trump and Joe Biden and their inability to articulate their policies very clearly or convincingly, and also their past history that everybody already knows that whatever they promised during the campaign is not necessarily going to happen after they've been elected. And that's not because of opposition. That's because they didn't even try in many cases. So you can't take people know they're a known commodity. They want to see Kennedy. Anyway, okay, you get the point. So after that decision by CNN, Kennedy has continued to advance. I don't know how they're going to keep him from meeting the criteria for being included in the debates in September. I'm sure they'll try. Some of the ways they're going to try, especially the Democrats, is by challenging him in various states where he's already gotten enough signatures, by bringing complaints to the elections offices or bringing lawsuits against him to try to get him off the ballot where he's already gotten in, or keep him from getting on the ballot where he's already gotten the signatures. So I'm sure they'll do that. And I promised you I would get back to Nevada as a case in point, so let me do that for you right here. In Nevada, as I said in my previous shows, Kennedy collected the number, more than enough signatures to get on the ballot, but when he presented them, Nevada's Secretary of State refused to accept them because they did not include a vice presidential candidate on the petition, even though there is no space for naming a vice presidential candidate, even though the major parties don't choose their vice presidential candidates until later in the summer, and even though a clerk at the elections office told Kennedy he did not need to list a vice presidential candidate, they refused to accept those. So the Kennedy campaign did bring a lawsuit, but it also filed another petition. But then it withdrew that petition because it found it had misspelled the United States, and it did not want to give challengers the opportunity to say, well, they've got all the signatures, but look, the petition misspelled the United States, so it has to be thrown out. And that's the kind of thing that they do. They look for any reason to exclude him from the ballot. And also what they've been doing is trying to get a lot of negative media stories to push down his poll numbers, right? If you can continually refer to him as an anti-vax, anti-science person with a brainworm and conspiracy theorists and things like that, if you keep getting the press to repeat that, which it doesn't seem like the Democrats are having too much trouble getting them to repeat, then you can push down Kennedy's poll numbers and helpfully, in their eyes, get him excluded from the presidential debate in September. But Kennedy did also add another state since that deadline of the 20th. The day after, they said that they got enough signatures, plenty enough signatures to get on this ballot in Pennsylvania. Now, Pennsylvania is important because it's a swing state, and it's the second one that Kennedy has gotten enough signatures for. The other one was Michigan. Actually, in Michigan, he didn't get signatures. He got the nomination of the Natural Law Party, which gets him on the ballot. And as I said in one of my previous shows about how Kennedy could win the election, one of the things he'd have to do is target swing states. So he'd have to be on the ballot in swing states because those would be the easiest states in which to pull ahead of the two major party candidates since they're pretty much neck and neck anyway. So two swing states, Michigan and Pennsylvania. I think that's a significant step forward for the Kennedy campaign. And beyond that, I should add that even as Kennedy is polling forward in the ballot access process, the other independent presidential candidate, Cornel West, is more slowly polling forward. He got on the ballot in Michigan this last week. Actually, this was announced on the deadline for the CNN qualification decision, but he was nowhere near getting on enough ballots. He's only on 8 ballots so far by my count. Let me give you my little handy counting thing here that you can see if you're watching the video version of this. So the Republican and Democratic parties, of course, will be on the ballot in all 50 states, plus the District of Columbia. Libertarian Party, somewhere in the high 30s, I think between 36 and 39 states they're on the ballot in. I'm trying to verify that, but it's hard to get information on that exactly. They also have the problem that even though they may have ballot access, some of the state parties are refusing to put their official nominee, Chase Oliver, on the ballot in their state, and the party is trying to, bring these people together to get all behind the candidate in some way, shape, or form. So we don't know how many ballots their candidate will actually be on. Green Party's on the ballot in 24 states by my count. RFK Jr. now is at 22, and probably more coming up because on Monday, Illinois' deadline for getting enough signatures in is that was bad construction of a sentence. Monday, campaign has to get enough signatures in to get on the ballot in Illinois. And then later in the week on Thursday in New Mexico, the deadline is. Most of the other deadlines are in July and August, which is coming up fast. And things should be happening hot and heavy. So the top ballot access parties are the Republicans, Democrats, Libertarians, Green parties, and then RFK as an independent candidate. Constitution Party is down there it's only on the ballot in 13 states. Their candidate is anti-abortion activist Randall Terry. And then Cornel West is even further down with only 8 states to his name. And finally, I still have on that list Claudia Dela Cruz, the candidate of the Party of Socialism and Liberation. As far as I know, still only on 5 states. Haven't seen a lot of coverage of her campaign, so I couldn't say whether it's more, but I don't think it'll be a heck of a lot more than that. So I'll probably be focusing on only the top 5 there, mostly the Libertarians, Green Party, and RFK, as well as what's going on of interest in the Democratic and Republican parties, and trying to sort out the positions and the considerations for who to vote for, at least how I think about it as we move forward. So the show has been about covering primarily the candidates for the presidency who are outside of the major party system. And if you are interested in following that and following along with me, please subscribe to the channel. If you like this video, hit the like button. If you have comments to make, I appreciate that as well. I like questions. I like challenges. I like information correcting me, all that stuff. I don't mind you praising me either. And that's about it for this week. Please check in again next week, and I hope you have a good week in the meantime. If you watch that presidential debate, I'm not sure if I will or not. Let me know if anything interesting happens in case I miss it. So thanks again. All right, bye.
With ease I see the chains are breaking. We gained our focus, the moves we're making will prove to determine our self-worth as a passenger on this vehicle Earth.